drag racing seems like there's a lot of different styles of drag racing these days. You got prep, you got no prep, you've got radial tires, you got versus the world, you got slicks, big tire, small tire. AFCO pretty well has a series of shocks to cover about every one of those, don't they?
We really do. And, the program is pretty broad. We've got shocks that'll bolt in the stock location. So if you've got a G-body, an S10, a first-gen Camaro, we can put shocks in the front. We can put shocks in the back in the stock location without really any modifications. We've got single adjustable shocks for the guys that are just kind of getting into the game. Maybe it's a street and strip application, or we're seeing some drag week type programs show up where it's maybe a shorter version, 3 or 4 racetracks or whatnot. But, a single adjustable shock, I think, could work well there. We've got double adjustable shocks. And then just within the family of double adjustable shocks, you've got some specific valving that we've developed over the years. And the valving is really, it's really dependent upon horsepower level and ET, how fast we really want to go. And really how serious we are about our competition. How do we want to win? Are we out there to compete? And so you kind of have to factor everything in. So within the double adjustable shock family, we've got the Eliminator series, which is by and far and away the most popular valving package that we have. Works with a lot of applications, a lot of small tire guys that aren't going real fast. We've got big tire guys that are in the 850 or slower quarter mile range. I think something in the 570s or slower to the 8th mile. But then as you start to get up in horsepower, we get over 1,000 horsepower on a slick. We've got the Big Gun series of shock, which has been a phenomenal, valving package for us throughout the years. It can be put in any length of shock. We can put them in the front. If we want to control the front end a little bit better, we can put them in the back. And again, with any length of shock, coilover style or stock location. You've got a G-body, stock location, but we've got a single turbo LS and we're making over 1,000 horsepower. That's a perfect candidate for a big gun shock because it's going to have a ton of torque. The rear suspension is going to move very quickly because it is a stock suspension, and that shock needs to be firm enough to control all that. I kind of equate the shock valving to a torque converter. You don't want to drive through the converter, so if you end up with a bunch of horsepower, you want to make sure your converter is able to control that and couple it up. Same thing with a shock. You want to make sure that the shock has enough capability to control the kind of energy that's going to go through the rear suspension. So we've got the Big Gun series of valving for slick tire guys over 1,000. We've got the Big Gun X valving for the radial tire guys, which that tire requires a little different valving package because the sidewall is so firm, so aggressive that we need a shock that controls that a whole lot more effectively. And again, you don't want to get out in front of the shock. You want to make sure the shock is able to control what you're trying to do because bottom line, no matter what kind of tire you're on, no matter what kind of rear suspension, that tire has to be happy. It has to be planted. The footprint has to be flat and smooth. As the car drives out, we don't need the thing to wrinkle and cup and start to initiate tire slip, which could ultimately become tire shake. So within the AFCO family, from single adjustable shocks to double adjustable shocks, stock location to coilover, we really can cover a majority of the applications out there. And then with the help from some of our really top-notch tech people, we can help guys get dialed in very quickly.
Okay. Somebody like myself that plays in the street a bit and does some no prep, would I need double adjustables on both ends of my car? Ideally, but if I can only afford one set of double adjustables, will you put them on the rear of the car?
Good question. We get that with some frequency. Single adjustable shocks work great on the front of the car because with our single adjustable shocks at AFCO, you control the rate of rise, the extension on the front. So we can control the timing of when weight shifts from the front to the back. And the old 90-10 technology is long gone. You don't want that thing to pop up, top out, and then upset the tire in the back. So single adjustables up front are perfect. The work's done off the rear tires. And so I think that's really where you want to have a double adjustable shock. Because again, we've got all this torque coming through, torque multiplication through the converter, gearing in the transmission, the rear gear, and we end up with a lot of acceleration opportunity here. So we really want to be able to control the axle housing, keep it stable, keep the tire planted, and let the chassis accelerate. So double adjustables are perfect. I really recommend doubles on the back when we've got, a limited tire, or if we're on a less than ideally prepped surface. We're doing a lot of no prep, getting a lot of calls for no prep. Guys are backward racing. They're going to the deep end of the racetrack and coming backwards, things of that nature.
Some of us not intentionally, but yeah.
Well, yeah, there are people that unintentionally end up around. And I'm not sure we have a valving package developed quite yet for that.
Well, with that, your double just be in the front rather than the back, I presume.
At least a couple of times. And that's okay too, as long as we don't bounce it off the fence.
Right.
But AFCO's got a really broad range of shock valving packages and applications to really fit most everything that we see out there.
One of the things that I get questioned about, Eric, is when you change the gas pressure and shock, is it changing the valving? Mm-hmm. And it really doesn't change the valving in it. It's basically just adding or subtracting rod pressure, which is kind of like putting more air in your slicks. If you got a slick at durometers at 20 at 7 pounds of air, you put 10 pounds of air, it's still going to durometer at 20. Mm-hmm. You just made it stiffer sidewall. And that's kind of what the gas pressure does in a shock. It doesn't change the valving, it's just changing the rod pressure. But can you not tune a little bit with that?
Mm-hmm. And I think the gas pressure also prevents cavitation and keeps the column of fluid stable, I think, a little bit, which I think also helps the shock's overall performance. If the shock is performing in a stable condition, it's also going to help keep the tire a little bit more stable. But with the canister option, at least, with the AFCO designed shock, it's been engineered with a bladder as opposed to a floating piston. There's less stiction when you go to a bladder, which equates to smoother operation, smoother function of the shock. Well, the other thing that this does, it doesn't add extra rod pressure into the shock. Like if you were to grab a 4-wheel drive off-road shock and try to compress it, it's going to have a lot of pressure. The further you push it in, the more resistance it's going to have, because you're displacing volume in there with the piston, and that generates more pressure that you feel with your hand. We've specifically designed the shock to not have that phenomenon occur, so that when the car's moving up and down, going down the racetrack, you're not getting a different sensation of load. If you had load cells at the tire, you would not get a loading and unloading because of the change in the height of the shock with the AFCO in the bladder design. The cool thing about our shock that we can do, though, is if you get someplace and there's a bump or a dip, and you can see it on the data that you're zipping the tire a little bit, the drive shaft grab's got a couple blips in it. Because of the design, because of the bladder, we can dump the gas out of this unit. It'll still function, where some shocks that have the floating piston kind of go dead. They lose their damping. We can still operate here when we have zero gas in this system. That'll let that shock get over that transition or that bump, or some racetracks have a tunnel, and over time the asphalt's settled over that, so you get a bump and then you get a ramp. And so if you don't have the shocks as soft as you need them, or maybe for that particular track you really needed some softer springs, but you're at the racetrack, with the AFCO canister shock, we just dump the gas, softens it up a little bit more, and we've seen some very positive results back to back, overlaying graphs on the data. The car definitely looks smoother going down track. So that's another advantage when we're tuning with gas, is if you get someplace and it's a little bit rough, we can start to pull gas out and see some performance gains.